India today has almost 1.3 CR consumers entering legal drinking age every year. There is a risk that consumers felt, what if it doesn't work? I'm giving you the guarantee that this will work. If it doesn't work for you, I'll give you your money back. While marketing may be all about creativity, it needs to be rooted in the business context. The strangest part about that is consumers find it very difficult to articulate.
Hey there, welcome to Marketing Mavericks with Indiefolio. Today we have Arvind Hangal with us, who is the marketing director at ABD. We talk about his journey, which starts from doing statistics to actually shift into marketing, working with some pharma companies outside India as well, and then his extensive experience in the AlcoBev category. We get a lot of advice for marketeers as well as freelancers and agency owners, and generally a lot of tips about marketing. Hey Arvind, thanks for your time and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kavan. Glad being here.
Really excited to have a conversation with you, be it pharma products or alcohol. You've had a pretty extensive experience in both of them. Before I get into your journey, I actually wanted to understand right at the start, right? What is it that prompted you to choose a career in marketing? Because if I'm not wrong, you did a Bachelor of Science. So when is it that you decided marketing's the go-to place for you?
Most of us who grew up in the 90s, we didn't have the sensory overload that the generation today has. And television used to be possibly the one source of entertainment that used to bring the family together. I used to wait for the breaks between the programs, right? And which is when you used to have ads coming on. So that possibly would be one of my first introductions ever to the world of marketing. Not that as a kid growing up, I ever thought that I'll want to grow up to be a brand manager. But that somewhere stays with you. Most of us end up being closet copywriters. Shift to a decision to have a professional career in marketing possibly happened towards the first year of my MBA course.
Any particular ads which which ring a bell, which you really like?
Multiple. I mean, and the fact is that they were so memorable that even now I can rattle off jingles, I can rattle off the names. So there used to be Maggie, it's different. There was the Hamara Bajaj whole ad. There was this Mile Sur Mera Tumhara that was iconic. I mean, it used to be a very different world. Where today you're jostling for attention for even that the first 8 seconds, and you're making sure your logo is there in the first 5 seconds, right? It was a very different world back then.
So follow up on what you mentioned. So you clearly have a science background. I've spoken to more leadership in marketing who have an engineering background, but also what really inspires them is the ads, the creative side of things. And when I talk to a lot of students who are considering marketing, they're confused if marketing's an analytical job or is it like a creative job. And if I have a creative mind versus an analytical mind, where is it more lopsided? Right? How do I know if I'm fit for marketing?
Let me rewind back to possibly my early years in marketing and when I joined brands. And this is just a diversion, but bear with me. So I used to find it very difficult to tell my mom, "Beta, tum exactly karte kya ho?" Right. And as a marketing guy, if you were asked, do you actually go out and sell the product? The answer is no. That's the sales team that does it. Do you actually go out and make the ads that we see on television or on digital? The answer is no. That's where the production house or the agency does it. Do you make the product? The answer is no. The manufacturing team does it. And therefore, it used to be a struggle to tell her, then exactly what do you do? And I think the answer lies in the fact that marketing at the very core is about putting people together and getting the best out of them. So you have internal resources, you have external resources, and you're pretty much like the CEO of the company, which is to say not the chief executive officer, but the chief energy officer. So you're the one who's in a way bringing energy to these teams, be they internal teams or be they external resources like agencies. And therefore, it is people management at the very core of it all. But to get to your point about analytical versus creative, in today's day and age, it's actually both. I don't think marketing is the only domain where you need creativity. Creativity is required in sales, is required in manufacturing, required in HR.
Got it. Once you switched One of the earlier jobs which you did was with a pretty large company, and you had a lot of responsibilities, under your belt. Now, before I unpack that, I want to ask you about the earlier stints of a marketer's career, right? You worked in consulting, and you also obviously been on the brand side and shaped a lot of brands there. It's usually, recommended that you need to experience both. What do you think about that? Are there any downsides or upsides in both? If you could just unpack your experience.
Given today's context and given how industry is operating, I would say then suggest that you should ideally get into a consulting role early on, if at all you still want to remain in marketing going ahead. At least in my case, I got into the consulting assignment after two stints, which was roughly 5 years down into my professional journey. What that does, it just unpacks a whole lot of analytical skills in you, be it something as simple as Excel and how you can, utilize Excel to the fullest, to the fact that you then start also looking at funneling down to the problem. How can you cut, slice problems, get answers to those problems? The approach to problem solving gets very different than from a purely functional lens. I also had the opportunity during my consulting stint to work on cross functional projects and cross industry projects. So it was not restricted to one industry or restricted to one function. Therefore, you, in a way, it gives you a sense of business as a whole, and you're not looking at just like the six blind men and the elephant. You're not just looking at one part of the business, but you're almost looking at the entire business as a whole. So therefore, that stint in consulting does give you that approach in terms of problem solving and the holistic nature, and it gives you an appreciation of the holistic nature of business. Post which I would claim that I've been able to do is apply that to marketing challenges as well. That grounding in a way has helped me all along, and I would credit that stint for the kind of analytical ability or analytical approach that one can have in marketing.
Within consulting, also, you've got like it forks into two usually. You've got creative agencies and then you've got consulting companies. Is there a difference between the two there as well?
It's a very different ballgame being a kind of a creative agency and a consulting. The difference between the two lies in the fact that the creative agency is at the end of the day giving you solution which possibly resonates with the consumer or possibly resonates with a certain audience, whereas a consulting company in most cases is giving you the framework to get to that approach. So I think it's a bit of what follow the lead and the lag.
I've actually never thought about it from that dimension. Um, I also meant to ask you, about deciding your first job. There's a usual critique, it's full of this advice is full in reels if you scroll, where people say that, people don't think a lot about their first job. But at the same point in time, because of this podcast, I often hear, marketeers saying, I just got a first job, and I let life come at me and I delivered. So how much is it about going with the flow, and how much is it about really deciding, okay, this is what I want to do, and executing on that?
Kavan, if truth be told, I fall in the second camp. I don't think I did have a couple of choices during placement at B school, but I had a PPO with this company with Ranbaxy, where I had done my summer internship as well, and I had a PPO with them. I chose to therefore exercise that option, the PPO option, and life happened after that. It was to a large degree what has also changed over the course of now 20 odd years, 2 decades now, is the fact that there are also a lot many options and opportunities that have arisen for students or for people to take a look at once they are, let's say, getting out of B school.
Right.
And therefore, there is almost a career path in every other industry, in every other function. And there are so many options available for people to explore. Therefore, if people have a certain guideline or if they have a certain path that they want to choose, more so today than before, there is always an opportunity that they will be able to do that. And people can make, and let's say, for instance, you do choose a path and you figure out it's not working for you. There are enough options available today for course corrections.
Right.
So therefore, in my case, I fall in the second camp where a job happened to me. But I would guess that in today's day and age, I would possibly suggest that people at least have a starting point in terms of what is it that they want their career paths to look like, and then you can keep doing course corrections as you go along.
That's some brilliant advice. I think a lot of people misunderstand this advice saying nahi bataya to chalega, right? And I think how to actually kind of perceive that is that if you don't know, it's okay, but you have to keep on trying and understanding what's wrong. And a lot of times people, if they don't know, they don't expose themselves to enough things to decide what they actually like, and then it kind of gets pretty challenging. Talking about Ranbaxy, so large company, and I think even when it comes to, I believe, the scope, at least based on what I read, was pretty incredible for a first job, right? I think you were looking at multiple countries, but specifically Africa, where you also kind of launched a new segment or new product. So could you unpack that a little bit more about how do you really sit in a country in like India and still communicate to a lot of people in Africa and the various countries in the African continent? So would love to know more about that.
Ranbaxy as a company, and especially for the management training program, and then on for the first job, it did give a lot of freedom. It gave a lot of opportunity to young talent. I was fortunate enough to be one of those. And in terms of the fact that to be honest, it doesn't hit you when you're there. You realize the magnitude of that freedom only once you move out. Saying, and when you start experiencing other companies, I was a fresh rookie. I hadn't even worked anywhere else before, and
Right.
I never got to know the magnitude of that freedom and that opportunity when I was at Ranbaxy. It was only post that I realized that this company is, either you could say this company is bonkers, or you could say, wow, this company has been so great. But in terms of that challenge of going out and dealing with both your own team in Africa as well as with the HCP community, which is the healthcare professional community, or for that matter, even consumers in Africa, it was quite an interesting ball game. It is obvious that you can't get an experience of what a country thinks like unless and until you have first-hand experience. So pretty much after every 3 months, I would travel to Africa and different parts of Africa for almost a month and a half. So during those 2 years, I did collect a lot of airline miles. Africa is primarily divided into this. So there's East Africa, Southeast Africa, which is more English oriented, and then there is French West Africa, which is more, as the name suggests, French led. The cultures are very different, and unless and until you immerse yourself there, it is very difficult to pick on the nuances, especially with the HCP community, with your teams. More importantly, first and foremost is getting that whole confidence, getting the whole comfort with your own team, and only post that will you then be able to go out and converse with your customer set and with your consumer set. So first-hand experience very clearly, and at the end of the day, I think the other universal thing that applies to all humans, and this I've realized after so many years now, working across different cultures, different companies, different sectors, is the power of storytelling. It possibly wasn't called that when I started out, and maybe that term is more in vogue now. But at the end of the day, what we used to do back then was storytelling with the healthcare professional community in Africa, was storytelling with consumers in Africa, and is also storytelling to a large degree with our own teams in terms of building the whole confidence, in terms of giving them that vision, and also giving them that promise of what this product holds and what delivery on this product holds for you. Those would be the two things. So first-hand experience, go out, immerse yourself in that culture, and second is obviously the power of storytelling.
On the first-hand experience piece, I want to follow up. A lot of people say, even in India today, that if you're in Bombay and you're serving to tier 2, get out and go there. What are the exact things you need to keep your ears out for when it comes to understanding consumer insights? Could you give any example of what really you do as a marketer to figure out a core insight from the customer data or just interactions?
So interesting thing. So clearly, market visits are the most exciting part of working, because A, it gets you out of office, and B, it obviously takes you to parts of the country that possibly you would have never visited otherwise. Right. One of the running jokes I have with my teams is that over the last 13 odd years in the AlcoBev industry, basis all the market visits that I've done in these so many years, I've realized that consumers never come to buy alcohol for themselves,
Okay.
because invariably, whenever I've been to market visits and you ask a consumer saying, you've come to buy this, do you want to try this brand of mine? Do you want to try this product of mine? 99% of the times the answer will be, ये मेरे लिए नहीं है, मैं किसी और के लिए लेने के लिए आया हूं, right? So that's the running joke, saying how come no consumer ever comes to buy alcohol for themselves? But be as it may, within a market visit, first-hand experiences market visits, which are great. You get to meet not just consumers, you get to meet trade as well. So, which is a retailer, which is the counter salesmen, who are they're the biggest source of knowledge, and they're also the biggest source of recommendation for your consumers, right? So it is great. They have the pulse of the market, saying what is working, what are consumers buying, why are they buying, how much, what is the coinage issue, what gift works with consumers. They know everything. So the counter salesman is your go-to guy.
I also want to know, like, do you incentivize them anyway to give you this data? Because, usually as anybody, when I'm reaching out to do any survey or asking somebody something, nobody wants to be bothered, much. And that's where you really struggle. Kia, do you have genuine customers who are willing to like properly take out time and give you feedback? So how do you solve that challenge?
So one is market visits, where you can get first-hand experience. The second is from a purely consumer insight point of view, is to do what, at least in our company, called first-hand insighting, which is where we go out and meet consumers regularly. And again, it is either a problem-based approach, or it could be in terms of saying that I want to find out, is there anything lacking in what the consumers are today. The strangest part about that is that, like most of us, consumers find it very difficult to articulate what it is exactly that is either wrong, or what it is that they need. And if there are any unmet needs, etc., it is very difficult for even us to articulate, right? And though we may be from the industry, we may be at a loss to articulate what is this unmet need. But the magic lies in a way decoding what the consumer is saying and what he actually means. The biggest trope in the AlcoBev industry is that across companies, across brands, across consumers, in the whole length and breadth of the country, if there is something wrong with your brand, the consumer will always say, "वो पहले जैसा taste नहीं है." And that is the simplest articulation. He is basically saying there is something wrong with your brand. I don't know. I can't explain to you what is wrong. So therefore, he gets to one tangible thing, saying कि वो पहले जैसा taste नहीं था उसका. But then you have to go out, probe, saying what is wrong, why. You'll eventually figure out that possibly there is a drop in social currency for the brand. There is a drop in some other incentive on the brand. Competition has given more incentive, and therefore you need to go out and drill deep. So first-hand insighting therefore works in the sense that you as the person who's doing that first-hand insighting will need to go out and try to understand what is the consumer actually meaning, and what is the meaning of the words rather than the actual words themselves.
I think the latter is where a lot of people struggle quite a lot. And I think that's the skill I believe you develop,
Correct.
more and more as you grow. I want to now talk about, your experience at Novartis, and you do a bunch of things there, from getting, viral campaigns to awards. I actually want to talk about the money back guarantee I believe you introduced for Otriven. And I believe it was the first time it was happening. I was very curious.
In that category, yes.
In that category. So very curious as to how does a claim like this work from a marketer's lens, right? Because it sounds risky as an entrepreneur. Saying money back, I'm like, okay, there are so many things that can go wrong, some of which I may not even control, and people are smart. So if they really want to kind of do something, they can kind of, trick you.
Yeah. So clearly, if someone wants to game the system, they can obviously game the system. But if I were to go back to the context of that whole money back thing, what was happening when I joined the company was that we had embarked on the consumer journey for Otriven. Otriven for decades had been a doctor-led brand, a prescription-led brand. And it was only when I joined that we had started the consumer journey. We used to call it the OTX journey, right? But to look at that whole space, Otriven works on blocked nose. So if I were to look at that whole space, what does a consumer typically do when he has a blocked nose is you either go out and reach out for Vapor Rub, which is a cream that you apply. You either go out and reach out for a cold tablet,
Mm.
Whereas what we were trying to do was to introduce this whole category of the decongestants.
Right.
In terms of the price that a consumer was paying, a cold tablet, and if my memory serves me right, was some 2 rupees. A Vicks Vapor Rub or any other brand that you can think of, which is the cold cream equivalent. A small bottle would have costed you, let's say, 30 rupees, 40 rupees. Whereas what we were asking consumers to shell out was 55 rupees, I think, for that one vial of Otrival. We said, what is the biggest barrier for consumers to try out? Clearly, one is the price itself, but more importantly, there is the risk that consumers felt that what if it doesn't work? Then I have to go back to the cold tablet, I have to go back to my inhaler or the Vicks inhaler or whatever it is for the block nose. And we said, how can we de-risk trials? Which is where the whole money back thing came in, saying, I'm giving you the guarantee that this will work. If it doesn't work for you, I'll give you your money back. So if price is the issue and you want me to de-risk the trial for you, I'm giving you the solution. And
Mm.
we obviously had empirical evidence in terms of redemptions on money back. We didn't have certain qualifying criteria and how consumers could claim that money back. From what I remember, in that during that 2 or 3 month campaign, I think we barely got some one or two claims.
Oh wow, that's
So
nothing.
yeah, and empirical evidence on money back also suggests that you and me as consumers also don't go through the whole process, right? So there is usually a lot of dissonance. The thing about consumers is that they will typically won't come back to you with the problem saying this didn't work. They'll just move on to the next thing.
Mm.
That was the whole context of money back, saying how can I go out and de-risk trials for consumers?
If I'm not wrong, in user experience, we learn this thing called loss aversion as a cognitive bias, which I think is similar, where you give something to somebody and then tell them if you want to give it back to me, it's okay. And there's a bias there, and I think it's too much work, or like you said, people just switch, especially if it's like not a very expensive item. But yeah, very very intriguing. There's a lot obviously we can talk about, your experiences before, but I believe I want to kind of take the time out now and discuss the entire AlcoBev industry. I already work with some of my clients here. I know for a fact so many of my friends absolutely love this category. There are so many new brands coming, so many new things happening here. Even entrepreneurs who are wanting to launch their own brands today. So
Yeah,
you work at ABD, which is like the third largest, spirits company in India. A
correct.
lot of top-notch brands doing amazing work since years at scale. And you've also launched a bunch of brands. Could you, you know, just kind of articulate for us what is the industry like if I want to work in AlcoBev or I want to start something in AlcoBev? If you can kind of just give a very bird's eye perspective on how do Indians consume alcohol and what are the various ways you can kind of build expertise as a marketer or as an entrepreneur.
So the alcohol industry in India broadly would get classified in three categories. So you have spirits, which is what we broadly classify as IMFL, which is Indian made foreign liquor. Then you have beer and wine. And lastly, you have country's liquor, which is country spirits. Right. So those are the broad three buckets. ABD operates in the IMFL or the spirits category. And between spirits, beer and wine, and country liquor, broadly, though not exact, the market is split almost equally between them. So the volume would pretty much be the same. Maybe beer a little lesser, country spirits maybe again a little lesser than spirits in general. But broadly, you can say they're all three. If there is one thing that defines the industry versus any other consumer-facing industry, most other consumer-facing industries, is the fact that it is a heavily regulated industry. So every state behaves like a country. We actually have import fees, export fees, even when we want to send, let's say, our brands from one state to the other, or we want to get brands from other states to here, and therefore it is this huge maze of excise laws, regulations. There is FSSA, then there is LMR that we have. So you're looking at possibly three or four entities that in a way have that govern whatever happens in the alcohol space. So a huge number of bodies that in a way govern what we can do, more importantly what we cannot do. Outside of that, if you were to ask me, the alcohol industry clearly is a fairly exciting place to be, with the fact that you have this continuing trend of premiumization happening in the industry. If I were to look at the fact that India today has almost 1.3 CR consumers entering legal drinking age every year. And the fact that you also have the acceptance of alcohol socially now for social drinking again. Plus, the fourth factor that you have is the fact that even women today are consuming alcohol like every other male earlier, and there is no taboo around that. So earlier there used to be the whole brown bag syndrome that consumers used to have, where consumers used to they would slip the bottle of alcohol into their bag, into a brown bag, so that people around don't know you're consuming alcohol. That syndrome has vanished pretty much. The taboo around women drinking alcohol has vanished pretty much. And therefore, you are seeing responsible drinking. India again is a market where consumers are constantly experimenting. You would have seen the rise of Indian malts. You would have seen the rise of gins in India. You would have seen that tequila is now, in a way, trending across. And therefore, Indians are constantly experimenting with newer things, newer flavors, new cocktails is trending everywhere. In-home consumption is increasing. Therefore, it's a buzzing place to be. So, yeah, that's what I have to say.
I wanted to ask you, if I was to build something in this space and I wanted to focus on, let's say, particular geography and a particular category, right? There are three broad categories, plus there is like the specific, like rum, whiskey, beer, wine. If I had to pick like a combination of just those two, right? Where do you think there is a like big growth opportunity for new players?
In terms of geography, it will have to be the metros, tier one towns, both from a point of view that if I were to look at people going out and drinking, it is largely in metros and tier one towns that you're seeing all the action happening, but also the fact that you are also seeing a lot of in-home consumption happening in metros and tier one towns, where house parties are now the norm. Like most consumer facing industries in the country today, is the dominant trend, and therefore there are multiple categories that are opening up. So you've got Indian malts, which is opening up constantly, space for and I'm pretty sure there is space for newer brands to come in. There are whites, in the sense gin, vodka, tequila, where I'm pretty sure there is enough and more space available in the premium. So the world is your oyster as far as the type of product that you want to bring in is concerned.
Got it. Got
The
it.
more unique, the better. But that applies that. But isn't that a general rule?
Right, absolutely. What's the real like marketing stack, right, in terms of the formats and the channels which you leverage, which works the most? Because usually people make brand campaigns, they run performance ads, and none of this is allowed for you. So whereas most of the energy really go into actually creating communication to elevate that brand.
To borrow from PNG, most of the energy goes into the moment of truth. So the first moment of truth, as well as and more importantly, the second moment of truth. This is a statistic which is possibly true even otherwise, but we actually went out and verified that through a survey and a study that we did, that almost 90% of the times, all consumers, before they are entering a off-premise outlet or an on-premise outlet, they've made up their mind in terms of what brand they're going to consume. And I'm guessing this will be true for most other industries as well. And therefore, what you're essentially wanting to do is to drive behavior change and make that shift in the consumer's mind in terms of dislodging a particular brand and trying to get your brand in there. Therefore, in terms of the avenues available to us and what we are setting out to do, you're essentially trying to ensure that you deliver the right messaging to consumers, and that there can be a variety of ways that you can do that. You can use the packaging itself to deliver that. You can use maybe retail influencers to deliver that messaging. You can use the CSMs, the counter salesmen, to deliver that message. Right? And we try to use these tools to go out and deliver that. In the on-premise, it could be your wait staff that can go out and deliver. In the on-premise, it could be a tent card that helps you to deliver that messaging. Those are some of the things that we go out and utilize to kind of stand out and to make sure that we are going out and talking to the right consumer.
There's also a lot of mention of surrogate advertising, which is like a very unique thing I see many brands do. So where does that come into play?
That's a term which was in use for some years, but at least at ABD, we don't believe in that. ASCII, as well as the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, lays out certain guidelines in terms of what constitutes or qualifies as surrogate advertising and what doesn't. So the use of brand extensions is pretty legal and valid, and that is what we follow. What that essentially does is that it allows you to use non-AlcoBev product categories with the same brand name, obviously with certain restrictions, guidelines that have been laid down, and going out and talking to consumers on both categories. From a company standpoint, what it does is it allows us to de-risk the business. You will typically also want to have the brand extension in complementary categories like packaged drinking water. Soda becomes a complementary category because that again goes with the AlcoBev product that you're consuming,
Right.
and maybe consumers will have some affinity towards that brand, even if it is in the form of packaged drinking water or for that matter soda. Like I said, it's more to do with brand extensions now, and the fact that ASCII, MIB, all of them, the CCPA, all of them are fairly active. Surrogate advertising, I would say, at least in our industry, is a thing of the past.
Understood. Um, I I I don't know if this falls under that, right? But I often see a lot of collaborations Alcobev brands do with many people. Music is a big one, and I also see the Sterling Reserve Music Project. That would be a brand experience in IP, or would something like that also for a lot of people go into the bucket of the surrogate advertising?
So for us, it was, and I can only comment about what we are doing with Sterling Reserve Music Project and what we've done in the past as far as Sterling Reserve Music Project is concerned. For us, it was a brand IP. We earlier Sterling Reserve used to be work on the proposition of chase the next. So which was always about saying that as a consumer, you are always wanting to chase perfection, but you don't stop at, because the irony of perfection is that the moment you reach a certain milestone saying that this is where I become perfect, there is always a next milestone available. And that was the whole proposition that we used to have. We picked up music as a platform or as the whole category primarily because for AlcoBev consumers, that is a huge passion point for most consumers. I would say 40%, from what I remember, 40% of consumers use YouTube for music, and therefore music is a great passion point. Music is something that also aligns, is in a way a complementary platform for AlcoBev consumption. Most consumers of AlcoBev would want to have music with alongside when there is alcohol consumption happening. And in Sterling Reserve Music Project, in the first avatar that we had a couple of years back, we were in a way doing a talent hunt for emerging talent. So we used to have a mix of both emerging as well as established talent that used to come in. The whole idea being that it was a platform to identify that talent and make sure that they achieve in a way that whole thing of perfection that the brand was talking about.
Understood. And how do you attribute things like ROI to initiatives like these, right? Because it's usually like long term, long tail, and it's if a marketer has an idea, they're obviously told to kind of talk about the return on this, the ROI on this. What's the real framework to use to kind of answer such questions on ROI?
From a very technical perspective or from a metrics perspective, one would say that you would want to do a BLS, a brand lift study, and figure out what the ROI on at least the mind metrics. It is very difficult to corroborate the correlation between any such IP that we have and to then go out and say what impact has it had on volumes in a particular market. Very difficult. But what we measure is more in terms of the mind metrics.
What would they mean? Mind metrics?
So essentially, it would be in terms of consideration, in terms of the proposition landing with the consumers. Is there a brand lift that you're getting? Is there between? It's almost like a pre and post in terms of saying that what were your mind metrics previous to doing this campaign and what is it post.
But do you assume this when you're planning for this, or are there like thumb rules for you to keep in mind? Okay, usually it's like target kitna hoga. If you do this and if you spend 1 crore, how much will it increase by? And that's where a lot of people get stumped saying, how do I do that? I don't have any background.
At the very basic, the difference between most other consumer facing industries and the AlcoBev industry, at least in India, is that, let's say, for instance, I were to look at consumer healthcare. Consumer healthcare does a very simple thing of a problem solution communication, right? So, there is a problem, you have a headache, please take this and you're done. Similarly, if I were to look at laundry, if I were to look at cosmetics, if I were to look at apparel, there is pretty much always a problem solution approach that one can boil it down to, saying stains, use detergent, happy mom. But in the AlcoBev space in India, more so considering the fact that we are not directly allowed to talk about our product, the AlcoBev industry has always relied on human emotions as the key construct on which our brands are based. So if you were to look at most of the brands that you and I know in the alcohol industry in India, they're all based on a very basic human emotion. And therefore, for us to go out and set a target on that human emotion is very difficult. Which is where we then go out and pick up passion points. We in a way create a brand world around that. So just to take up the example again of Chase the Next, it was around this whole human need to be perfect, human need to be the first amongst equals. And that is where we then said, let's create that whole brand world around Sterling Reserve with Sterling Reserve Music Project. And we had a couple of other expressions as well in terms of how we brought that whole proposition. So I think that's the difference, and that is the reason why it may be very difficult to set a target to that in the alcohol industry.
Makes sense. I want to now jump into the last few bits. We're almost at time, and I want to, take the opportunity to represent a lot of the network which Indiefolio manages. Right, we represent thousands of independent consultants in the creative domain, a lot of founders who own production houses or boutique studios, etc. And there are a few things going on in our mind, with everything changing around us right now. First and foremost, I would like to ask you just a, straightforward question. You work with a lot of agencies in your experience. What separates a good agency from a great agency?
I would say two things. One is clearly creativity, but second is business understanding.
Okay.
There's nothing more irritating, uh, and maybe that is a strong word, but there is nothing more irritating than an agency coming to you with an idea which, from a business standpoint, it doesn't deliver or it doesn't work. Right. And that could either be because the agency doesn't have an understanding of consumer behavior in the industry, doesn't have an understanding of how trade behaves, possibly doesn't have an understanding of the consumer journey in your industry. So I think what sets apart a good agency from a not so good agency is possibly these two factors.
You'd hear an agency respond to this, in a way where there's a lot
of all on the strength of the brief.
Yeah, I think you said it and I articulated very well. I'm actually doing this course on brand management from Micah. Okay, and there's a certain portion in that which teaches us about these 9 steps you need to take to come up with a brief and align your team. I genuinely feel these things were created when marketing was 2-3 TVCs, 2-3 print campaigns a year. But today, like, it's thousands and thousands of items you need in a year because there are so many channels and formats and blah blah blah, a lot of things. So I empathize with the marketer, right? Like it's just hard to do that 9-step process when you need something in 3 hours. So agencies then feel, okay, how is it that I can be more informed when there is no time to kind of get that download? Any best practices you've seen some of your favorite agencies do, which you'd like to recommend?
It's not something that is bold from the blue, but most agencies also accompany us on market visits, right? So some of the agencies accompany us on market visits because that actually gives them a first-hand feel in terms of what is my sales guy going through, what is the consumer doing, talking, and it is not the highfalutin English that possibly works every other time. The consumer may have a very different way of pronouncing things.
Right.
You may come up with the most creative of brand names, but the consumer may not be able to pronounce it. Right? And therefore, I think the agency doing market visits and more so market visits with you, with the client, is a great best practice. And the second thing is the whole consumer insighting, for the first-hand consumer insighting bit. So if they are also part of that whole journey, then clearly I would guess that these outlandish ideas would then kind of get smaller in number. Agencies are meant to present outlandish ideas. There is nothing to say that they shouldn't, but there should also be that whole at the back of it. There should be some amount of business understanding to it, business context to it.
Another thing in all of our minds obviously is AI, and the question is not really about what to do about AI. I think everybody now knows that you have to embrace it. I think creative people should be the ones who use AI in the best manner possible. I think that is essentially the use case, right? It enhances your capabilities. So imagine you already have those capabilities, where it'll take you. But I'm not seeing a trend actually. That's the wrong way to put it. I think I'm hearing conversations, let me say it that way, where a lot of people are saying, you'd need a very small marketing team. You'll need a very small agency because you're essentially employing these AI agents who are like AI teammates, which can, work for you. Which makes me wonder that would creative then become something which is done in-house? Or do you think you'll continue to expect, agencies which usually come at a higher cost, but you do it because of ideas and variety and speed and so on, which maybe you could say AI is solving for. I wanted to know, do you have any thoughts on that?
The business of creativity is very different from being creative in business, right? So the whole business of an agency, of getting that whole creative set of people, they have their own aspirations, they have their own dreams, which may not always necessarily work in on this side, on the client side, right? We may not be able to meet those. And therefore, in the future, do I see or do I envision a future where there are a lot of creative people in the brand team here? The answer may be not in the near future for sure. Because it's a very different business altogether. It's a business of creativity, very different business altogether. We are not in that business. But at the same time, yes, AI has crept into our world and more so in the creative world. And while it may not help us to do our creatives on our own, or at least at this point in time, we haven't attempted that. And we are currently, any which is working with agencies which are employing AI to deliver creatives to us. So that bit has already started.
Right.
And full service agency versus boutique agencies, if that was, I think there was some question embedded in your thing, in your whole question there around boutique versus full service. So each of them serves their own purpose. So if I were to look at, let's say, a new launch that I want to do or enter into a new category, new segment, I would then possibly rely on the services of a full service agency, which has the planning might, which has therefore, can help me in that piece as well in terms of strat, and then funnel it down to communication and how we can execute that on ground. But at the same time, if it were an existing brand where I'm looking at newer, fresher ideas to come in, and maybe there is the agency on record has been around for some time, and like it happens with most of us, there is a bit of fatigue that creeps in. And that is where boutique agencies can come in with a kind of like a breath of fresh air to give you newer ideas, fresher ideas. So I think that's the way I look at how you can approach the full service versus the boutique agency conundrum.
Got it. Got it. I think that's a really great way to put it. And I think more and more I'm seeing that that's going to become the way people operate. Maybe with some in-housing also. When I talk about the entire industry, I see a lot of people tuning into this podcast who want to become a marketing leader one day, a CMO one day. And if you can kind of highlight any, advice or best practices once again, which young marketeers can follow to have a successful career, to become a marketing leader one day, what would that be?
I think there would be three things. One is always bear in mind that at the end of the day, irrespective of what you do with the product, with the communication, with your own teams, there is a consumer who needs to buy whatever you're selling, right? And therefore, so long as you do not connect with that consumer, you do not get consideration from that consumer. And lastly, there is no confidence from the consumer, which is that where he is willing to shell out that money or that card from his wallet and swipe it. Until that time, as a marketer, your job is unfinished. The job is only done when finally you have this consumer going out and swiping his card or putting cash on the table. So therefore, consumer is king. Treat him with him or her with respect, and try to understand more of that consumer. So clearly, which is where we spoke about a lot about consumer first-hand insighting over the course of the last hour or so that we've been talking. So that would be one. The second would be in terms of, like I mentioned right at the start, that what marketers and budding marketers more so need to realize is that at the end of the day, like most staff functions, marketing is about people management. So it is about managing people within your organization. And more so, if you're looking at consumer facing organizations, marketing typically becomes the growth engine for the organization. So you're interacting with manufacturing, you're interacting with the supply chain, you're interacting with sales, you're interacting with HR, strat teams, and therefore you're trying to kind of get all these views together and put a united face forward and kind of make sense of all of these stimuli that are coming getting thrown at you. At the same time, there is a whole world outside that the marketer deals with in terms of agencies, be it research agencies, be it advertising agencies, design agencies, digital, there is media to understand. And therefore, clearly, people management is something that, we'll need to, or the budding marketer will need to realize is that he or she will need to be good at or learn.
Understood.
And then the third thing is that which in a way connects back to the first one, which is that while marketing may be all about creativity and irrespective of how much of analytics that you do, it needs to be rooted in the business context. So ultimately, it needs to have that whole business outlook to it. We may have the best, most creative ideas there, but if they're not serving the business purpose, then it is just a great creative idea.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Arvind. I think I personally learned so much about marketing myself and about the whole pharma and AlcoBev industry. I'm really glad you could give me some time, and I hope you had fun.
Yes, I did, Kavan. Glad to be on this podcast. Thank you so much.
It was honestly an honor. And for everybody who's tuned in, thank you so much for staying with us so long. If you'd like another marketing leader like Arvind, please like, share, and subscribe. A new episode will come out very, very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.